I'm waiting.
For what?
There you go. Now, so we're starting a new sermon series, and it's called Rock My World. And this is the first in this series.
Drop the mic.
This is the first in the series, and it has to do with some of the folks in both the Old Testament and the New Testament that God just does something or says something, and it just turns their thinking upside down. So let me just share with you a little bit about what's going on. It's the title comes from the people we're going to talk about, not necessarily this congregation, although it is interesting. I turned 60 last month, and when I was about Benton's age, I thought, you know, there were cool people, and that's everybody that was in my age group or lower, and then there were adults. And at that age, you don't really think what that age is. It's just, they're not too much older than you, but they're older. And then there was like the ancient ones, right? Well, as I've gotten older, I start to think, well, hey, wait, I think some of those people I thought was ancient, I'm there now, But you guys, there's some of you that have just made me feel so good about life. Since I've been here, there's been a couple of you, and I won't name names, but it's a little pat on the hand, and over for coffee or whatever, and then you get this comment. And I think at 60, you get this grandfather, married 40 years. Well, Rick, I'm old enough to be your parent. Yeah, and so your perspective changes a whole lot about age. We're going to look at some folks in the Bible that God just turns their thinking upside down. First point is, yeah, right. I want you to think about maybe God is speaking to you at this point in your life, and you're not all that willing to listen. It's kind of, yeah, right. So the very first person we're going to look at is, she could be classified, maybe, possibly, as a glass half empty sort of personality. Do you know people like that? Mm-hmm. No matter what it is, I'm looking outside and I can see the sun reflected on the rock, and I'm thinking, man, gorgeous day. And then there's some folks that are going to say, yeah, I looked at the weather report and I think they've got some rain. It might be next month, but it's coming, right? That's the glass half empty sort of folks. You know them? Well, this gal is like that. In Genesis chapter 18, verse 12, she has been told, now keep in mind, at this point, she's about 89 years old. And she's been told that she's going to have a baby. So can you see? Yeah, right. And it was no more probable then than it is now. I mean, yes, keep in mind, she passes away at the age of 127. But still, at 90, this is almost 89. This is, it's just an impossibility. And so she's been told, you're going to, this time next year, we're going to come back and you're going to have a baby. You're going to have a son. And so look at her answer. So Sarah laughed to herself. That's not good when you're dealing with God like that. Saying, after I am, and can you relate to this? I am worn out, and my Lord is old. She's talking about her husband Abraham, which, any trivia, how much older is he than she? 10 years. So at this point, 89 and 99. So, and my Lord is old. Yeah, this is happening in our bedroom. And the kids are gone, so we can wait. He knows. Okay. Shall I have pleasure? And the pleasure, of course, is having a child. Let's go back in time just a little bit, just so you get their story. So at the age of 75 and 65, they're in Ur of the Chaldees. They're over near the Euphrates River. And God just appears to Abram. And at this time, he's not Abraham, and she's not Sarah. It's Abram and Sarai. And Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 and 3, God drops this bombshell on them. And I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, based on this promise, Abram does something pretty unique. Ladies, this would be equivalent to your husband coming to you one morning and saying, you know, I've been thinking about it, honey. We really need to enjoy our retirement years. So I think we need to go out and spend about $100,000 on an RV. And we're just going to travel all around the country. What do you think, honey? And you're thinking, well, I've got my quilt group. I don't really want to leave them, right? You know? So they do. I mean, and this is back in the days. It's BR. It's before RVs. You know, so they get up and they go to this land. What's particularly unique about it is when Abram is talked about in Hebrews chapter 11, that he's a great person of faith. He goes to this land and he looks at this land and he never possesses it. All God does. Think about this promise. He's 75 years old. He says, I want you to get up. I want you to go. I want you to follow me. I'm going to make you into a great nation. And you're going to go look at this land, but you're not going to possess it. Your heirs will possess it, but you won't. How many are up for that journey? I mean, hey, guys, I want you to sell everything. I want you to leave everything behind you. Just follow my promise. And by the way, you're really not going to see any results in your lifetime. How many of you are up for the journey right now? Right? Okay. So you understand the but here. So you fast forward just a few verses, chapter 15, and look at what's going on with Abraham and Sarah. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless. I just want to gripe right now, God. Anybody in here gripe with God? I'll admit it. Yeah, there's not, I'm thinking, God, I really want you on my page. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus. It's my servant, the guy working for me. He's the only one I'm leaving anything to. And Abram said, behold, you've given me no offspring. God, you brought me out here on a promise, and nothing's happened. And a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. Would you perk up a little bit? And he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and number the stars. If you are able to number them, then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Sounds pretty good. You know, and this is in a culture where the more kids you have, the more blessed you are. Number one, if you grew up on a farm, you grew up on a farm. Guess what's great about a bunch of kids?
Sure.
Free labor. Yeah, it's food and clothes, and mom can sew the clothes, and yeah. So these guys are shepherds, so he's thinking, oh, you know, number of the stars, that's pretty good. But keep in mind, 75 and 65. And he believed the Lord, and he, God, counted it to him, Abraham, as righteousness. Do you believe God that much? I mean, really, is it one of those things where you really buy into some of the things that he says to you? Sometimes we do. but sometimes maybe we might be like Abraham and Sarah. So let's fast forward. It's now, they're 85 and they're 75. So it's been 10 years. God's promised you all these great things. What would your attitude be? Now keep in mind, we're closing on our house finally on Tuesday, prayerfully. We're hoping, I'm not counting too many chickens, although I did call the bank and say, please stop the bank draft. So they're not collecting any money on Wednesday, but we're just praying that all of a sudden, magically, there's all this money shows up in the checking account on Tuesday afternoon, right? And then, it's still been 2 years of this. $1,400 a month, that kind of gets old after a while, and you're praying to God, please, God, make this go away, right? 10 years. Chapter 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. Oh, wait, you guys remember this part of the story, don't you? They come up with their own solution, and it's so wise. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. I always thought that was a cartoon character myself. Oh, some of you actually got that. I was afraid that. Yeah, Hagar the overworld. And Sarai said to Abram, behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. What's she doing? In the age-old, it started in the garden. Remember the guy Adam? God, that woman you gave me. So not only is this predicament that we're in your fault, it's her fault, and I've got nothing to blame. Here's Sarah, and she's saying, God's kept me from having children. Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. Do you remember the rest of the story? Does this work out well? No. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. That's a separate sermon. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, what did she do? She looked with contempt on her mistress. Hey, I'm giving the old guy a kid. You've done nothing. Can you kind of see this little play going on? And Sarai said to Abram, don't you love human nature? Just look at this. May the wrong done to me be on you. Now, who talked him into it? Truly, he didn't go kicking and screaming, did he? But does this happen in your household at times? I mean, this is a whole marriage series, just right here. May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. Things have gone south super quick. But Abram said to Sarai, behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. Is that a good idea? No. Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. Okay. Doesn't look very good, does it? Let's fast forward a little bit longer. By the way, what happens next is there's this little side stop that God makes with a couple of angels, and they stop by Abraham's tent. He's Abraham by now. And anybody remember what they're on their way to do? There's a lovely place, or twin towns, called Sodom and Gomorrah. Are things going well there? No. And so this is just a side stop. So God said to Abraham, as for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her. And by the way, all those promises do come come about. I mean, God does fulfill his promises. Then Abraham fell on his face and, and what did I say at the beginning? He's 99, she's 89. And he laughed. Can you relate? I mean, this is a Bible story. I know you're supposed to be super righteous right now, and you're just supposed to, believe it and just buy it wholeheartedly, which you should, but isn't there a part of you that's just saying, well, if that happened to me, I'd understand, right? Yeah, I would. And so he laughed and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. And, he's concerned about this son, and rightly so. Notice how God answers him. And God said, no. But Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. Pretty big setup so far. I mean, at this point, they're 100, they're 90. Have they listened to God? Have you ever made a bad decision when it comes to God, and it was based upon maybe things weren't going the way you thought they should go? Can you relate to that? I can. I can just see, a Hagar and Ishmael sort of mistake all the time. I mean, it happens to us, doesn't it? And God gives these promises, and sometimes we just can't wait. We want it in our time. So here's the promise again. Genesis chapter 18, starting in verse 9, and we're actually catching up to where Sarah left. They said to him, and this is God and the two angels that are with him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, she is in the tent. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Somehow I see that happening in a lot of households. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Do you think maybe this was God's plan after all? The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. I mean, the Bible's saying it very plainly. I don't know nothing about bearing no babies. It's just, that's what's going on. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? And verse 14, so important. I think maybe you need to underline it. This is a good one to memorize. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Some translations say, is anything too difficult for God? Others say, is anything impossible for God? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. Notice what's happening. But Sarah denied it. I did not laugh, for she was afraid. He said, no, but you did laugh. Can you relate? Do you feel that maybe, you go to the doctor and a lot of times now, once you reach a certain age, it just seems like there's something new going on all the time. Right? We were laughing earlier. We've got some bionic people in here. How many remember the $6 Million Man? Yeah. And what was the spinoff with the really cute girl? Yeah, Lindsay Wagner, and that was Bionic Woman. You know, did you realize that we're living in that age? I mean, there's people walking around in this building that have bionic parts. I don't know about $6 million, but it is kind of pricey. You know, I mean, we live in this age. Yeah. But isn't it disappointing that, man, things just don't move the way they used to? It's harder to get up. It's harder to go to sleep. And that bed isn't all that much comfortable anymore. Now that recliner is starting to look kind of like it's an option, right? Or are you one of those that sits down and you're watching TV and that's where your nap happens, but you didn't plan it, right? You know, there's only so much oomph in your oomph, and it's just running out. And yet, that statement by God, nothing is too difficult for God. They're now 190. It's Genesis chapter 21. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said. And by the way, in between 18 and 21, there's something interesting that takes place. Sodom and Gomorrah, right? The Lord visited Sarah as he had said. And I'm sorry, I watched the video this morning. It was the Skit guys, and they had different Bible characters that were asking for advice on how to relate the Bible more effectively. And Lot was one of those people, and he had a little pile of salt sitting in front of him. So, and the joke, they kept picking on him about his wife. So the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. That's a positive. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Is anything too difficult for the Lord? Truly. Over the years, there's been something in the neighborhood of 1,200 studies on 400 different reviews or journals about faith and healthy living. Guess what the conclusion is? Interesting thing. You know, some of these scientists, when they started these studies, weren't necessarily wanting to prove that Christianity is a pretty good thing. Some of them were just saying, yeah, these people, they don't believe in anything worthwhile. Let's prove them wrong. So prayer, for example, they did great studies on prayer, and they discovered something interesting about prayer. You could have somebody in a room recovering from whatever. They don't even know that there's a group of people in the next room that are praying for them, and guess what happens? They get better. There's another study, and it's a psychological study, and it has to do with spiritual well-being. And one of the things that's a correlation about how healthy you are, how well-adjusted you are, has to do with how you view yourself with God. If you think that you and God, you know, right on, brother, we're tight, right? If you've got that sort of attitude, guess what happens? You recover from cancer better. You recover from cancer. Your recovery times are shorter. If you're an addict and you're, you know, one of the problems with addicts is that they continue in their addictions because they're just so convinced that they're a piece of crap. But you turn them on to God and let them know they're forgiven, and something wonderful happens. All of a sudden, it's easier for them to unburden the reins and chains of addiction when they start to let go. Here's a few other things. Faith reduces stress. You want your blood pressure to go down? Try praying a little bit more. Get a little bit more active in your faith journey. I mean, become very, very active in what you do. Community improves emotional health. So what we do here, actually a community of believers gathering together. There is an aspect, there was a part of me that was saying, you know, this isn't just about pew sitting. But truly, just coming into the community and being part of the community improves your emotional health. When you know that there's people in this room that know your struggle and pray for you, you start to live better. Senior life becomes much, much easier. Helping others. So this is the part that's really crucial to the point today. Because Sarah was having children, a child, but we bear spiritual children. Helping others improves life satisfaction. Years ago when I was with McDuff, it was my turn. In commission sales, it's called an up system, and it was my up. And this group of people come in, and this is Central Florida. They come in the store, and we're selling TVs and appliances. And they go right to the TVs. They come in, and they're actually agents for the guy who started USA Today. You ever heard of him? Newhart. A pretty interesting guy. He started not only USA Today, but Florida Today, and he was CEO of Connect News Chain. He died in 2013. But what an interesting life. His house, they bought a bunch of TVs. He wasn't very bright. He bought RCA, and I'm not a fan of RCA. And so, I mean, great big 32-inch TVs and 27-inch TVs and a bunch of 20-inch TVs. And I mean, it was a truckload of TVs. So it was overall for a commission salesperson, it was a pretty good sale. They then had to deliver them to his 10,000 square foot mansion in Cocoa Beach. But he was one of the most miserable people I've ever met. He had no hope. Now, go back in time and consider John Wesley. Lived to be 87. When he died, the only thing that and Wesley was the guy who started the Methodist Church, the Wesleyan churches, pretty famous sort of name in Methodist circles. He lived in the 1700s, and when he died, they went through his pockets, and they went through his dresser drawers, and he just had coins. That's all he had. Now keep in mind, when he passed away, and he worked right up until he died, but one of the things that he did was he just helped people. Early in his career, when he was making 30 pounds a year, which was pretty significant, his chambermaid comes in, and it's cold outside, and England's always cold, but it's particularly cold, and all she's got is this thin linen shawl. And so he reaches in his pocket. You know, he loved cigars, he loved his beer, he loved his coffee. You know, there were a lot of things he loved, and at this point in his life, John Wesley was spending money on him. So he reaches in his pocket to buy her a new coat, and guess what he discovers? He doesn't have any money. He says, that's not going to happen anymore, Lord. So that year, he learned how to live on 28 pounds, which is, it's healthy. And he gave 2 pounds to charity. The next year, his income doubled to 60 pounds. He still lived on 28 pounds and gave away 32. The next year, it went to 90 pounds, so he gave away 62 pounds and lived on 28. Are you starting to see there's a trend here? By the time he died, and here, let's put it in today's dollars. By the time he died, he was making $150,000 a year. And he was living on $28,000, and he gave it all away. And all for the Lord. He traveled all over. He came, did you know that John Wesley left England and came right here to Savannah, Georgia? Much happier person. You take and you pick up some church hymnals. Brother Charles wrote a lot of the hymnals that a lot of our old churches still sing. You help someone else, and your attitude gets better. If you're looking at a miserable Christian, chances are they're not helping anyone. Which is really the point this morning. Nothing is too difficult for God, and He can take and open up the womb of a 90-year-old woman. And then He dreamed the same thing for you and I. But they're called spiritual children. And the only way it happens is if, like Abraham and Sarah, you step out on faith and you say, okay, God, here am I, send me. But if you sit and you complain and think about what we've traded the church for, it's become kind of a menu-driven affair. You come into church and you say, well, I wish they would play this song because I really want my song sung. I really wish they would do this decoration because that's really what I want. Or here's the tough one. Maybe it's one of those things where we say things like, no, I don't want to do that. It's too hard. Maybe it's this 127 sale. How many are afraid to go out on? I have to do it twice. I have to go on to 127, pass all the psychos. I'm sorry, maybe that's some of you. But anyway, drive all the way down this crazy highway, get here, jump in this parking lot. And by the way, there's a memorial service here next week, so it's a double whammy. Just during the 127 sale. That's too hard. I don't want to have to get out of my comfort zone to do that. Well, I don't know. What if Jesus had said to God, God says to Jesus, it's time for you to go, son. It's, that plan we talked about, you on earth, born of a virgin. Dad, I don't really want to do that. That's too hard. Those people are dirty. They smell. And they, and they all have bad breath. They eat garlic like you wouldn't believe, and hummus, right? What about the cross, son? Dad, can't somebody else do it? Dad, I'm really comfortable right now. I've worked hard to get to where we are right now. I don't really, I think it's for a younger generation. Can't you send somebody else, Dad? Does that sound like the conversation that went on in heaven? Do you think the throne room had those sort of echoes in it? I don't think so. I don't know about you.